Hi everybody, welcome to the Healthy Gardening Channel with Jesse. Today we're talking about Pakistan mulberry cuttings. Hey everybody, how are you doing? I'm here today to talk about Pakistan mulberries. Pakistan mulberries are one of the more difficult mulberries to work with here in Zone 9A. All mulberries, for the most part, all mulberries are pretty resilient. They have a good cold tolerance, they have good heat tolerance, and they're easy to propagate through cuttings. However, I found and learned from experience that the Pakistan mulberry is a little bit different. Here in my yard I have white Pakistan mulberries and I have red Pakistan mulberry. Back in February of 2020, we had a really bad freeze here in Texas. I was out of town during the freeze, so I wasn't able to come and move plants and take care of them in the proper way. Before leaving town, there were some plants that I brought inside because I thought it was going to be a regular type Houston area Zone 9A type of a freeze, which would mean, in the mid 20s, maybe hitting the low 20s. Instead, the temperature got down to 9, 10, 11, 12 degrees in my area at night and did not rise above freezing for 4 days straight, which meant it was 28 during the day, 12 at night, 25 during the day, 9 at night. And this happened for a period of 4 days straight. We had snow and everything else that you would associate with a place that gets a real winter, which here in the Houston area, we don't get true winters like, people maybe in Oklahoma or Massachusetts or North Carolina or other states like that actually have, true winters. So we had single digits and low double digits for 4 days straight, and a lot of plants suffered and died. What I'm talking about today, however, is Pakistan mulberries. In my yard, I have dwarf everbearing mulberries. I have what I call a lavender mulberry, and I have a white Pakistan mulberry, and I have a red Pakistan mulberry. Originally, when I got my red Pakistan mulberry, it was in the spring and summer months, and it grew probably 15 feet in 1 year. I cut it back because it was very leggy. I cut it back. The second year, after we had a winter, relatively mild winter, the second year it was a little bit slower growing. Well, during that second year, I went and bought a Pakistan white mulberry, which was a little whip. It was tiny. And because I noticed that the Pakistan red mulberry was a little bit fickle, I babied that plant the first year that I had it, and I did not put it in ground until the fall of 2019. So in the fall of 2019, I put my white Pakistan mulberry in ground, and I had my red Pakistan mulberry, because it had done so poorly after that first winter, I actually took it out of the ground and put it in a pot, trying to take better care of it. It was a 40-gallon pot, so it was a sort of big pot. Well, I left town the weekend of the big freeze in February of 2020, which coincided with Valentine's Day in Houston. During that big freeze, my red Pakistan mulberry was left outdoors, even though it was in a large pot. It was left outdoors in an area of the yard that would get winter sun, kind of out in the middle of the yard. My white Pakistan mulberry was planted near a fence in the eastern side of my yard with western exposure. Problem is, it had the shadow of the house blocking it from the western exposure. Long story short, The Pakistan mulberry, prior to that freeze, during the months that it was in the ground, had grown 5 feet taller than it was, so it's probably 9 feet with multiple branches, maybe even more than that. The freeze hit. I'm out of town. My red Pakistan mulberry died completely. My white Pakistan mulberry lost some of its leaves. The leaves at the top were still on the tree through the freeze. And some of the lower branches died back due to cold. But any branch that was a ½ inch or an inch in diameter did perfectly fine. And within 2 to 3 weeks, it was sprouting new buds. And I have to say, for us in Houston, the Houston area, Zone 9A, Gulf Coast area, this would probably apply to anybody in the Gulf Coast, Zone 9A, Zone 8B. Our winter oftentimes is warm, and then we'll have spikes where it gets cold. In that particular winter, we had a cold spike in November, and then it was warm all the way up until February. What happened during that warm is it caused a lot of the trees and plants to think that it was springtime after we had a cold snap in November. Weather warmed up, plants started budding and trying to bloom because they felt like spring was approaching. Then February hit and we had a really bad freeze. So there was a lot of damage to plants that had new growth. Any fruiting tree that had flowered by that time, those flowers were gone. Any fruiting tree that is normal for this area, those flowers were gone. If you had a subtropical tree that for some reason was able to take the cold, if it had flowered, there's no fruit. But I found my Pakistan mulberry was dead. And so I'm getting all the way to the point of this video, which is I went out and bought a brand new Pakistan mulberry tree. And now in 2022, January, in Texas, throughout Texas, we just had another freeze. This freeze was not nearly as bad as the February freeze of 2021, but this particular freeze, in January of 2022, took us down into the mid to upper 20s overnight. And I think every day we got back above freezing, but at night it would get down to the 20s, upper 20s, low 30s. And in some areas, low 20s. But it wasn't that bad. That would be like a normal type of winter freeze that we get here in the Houston area. Well, because of the 2021 February freeze, I was reluctant to keep everything outdoors. I potted up everything during 2020. Anything that was left alive that was in the ground, I dug it up for the most part and put it in a pot. Some of the things I left out there because they'd survived previous winters where we didn't have a hard freeze. So just before the freeze, I went out and bought another Pakistan mulberry. Here it is. If you look here, if anybody knows anything about Pakistan mulberries, you will know that a Pakistan mulberry isn't on the cheap end for fruiting plants. Now you might ask, why did I prune it that way? Why did I prune this mulberry tree in this way? Well, I had to. While I was moving plants around and bringing things in before the freeze, there was a period where I wasn't paying attention, and I have a very inquisitive bulldog who got hold of my brand new tree And everywhere that you see a pruning snip was a branch that he decided to chew off. And he messed up the roots a little bit. But as you see, the tree is still alive. But it forced me to go into an emergency pruning. Here are some of the branches that I had to prune off. I have them sitting in water. Here are some more of the branches that I had to prune off. Also have them sitting in water. Why do I have them sitting in water? Because I am going to propagate these Pakistan mulberry cuttings. And as I mentioned with Pakistani mulberries, particularly the red variety, they are more fickle than other mulberry plants. Everbearing mulberry and other mulberry varieties, you can easily propagate cuttings with very little effort. In the past, prior to my other Pakistan mulberry dying completely, when I mentioned earlier that it shot off 15 feet in 1 year, when I pruned it and cut it back, I did a similar type of process where I saved cuttings to use as either scion wood for grafting or for cuttings that I would like to propagate. And as I mentioned, these are sitting in water. These Pakistan mulberry cuttings are sitting in water so they be preserved. You want to see them? This is just a random cup. I don't remember where it came from, but they're just sitting in water. Doesn't matter what kind of cup you use. And if you're going to have them sitting in water for a couple of days while you figure out what you're going to do, you need to change that water frequently so the plants stay alive. You don't want bacteria or fungus or anything like that to get in the water and kill your plants or your cuttings. But I mentioned in another video, or I mentioned earlier, that Pakistan mulberries are more fickle than other mulberry tree types. And that's because they are. I don't know the exact reason, but they are. They're more fickle when it comes to the cold, and particularly I'm talking about the red Pakistan mulberries. And they're more fickle when it comes to direct sunlight and heat, because in zone 9A, where I live in Houston, which is very hot and very humid from May through September, the end of May through the middle of September, very hot and very humid. The tree needs protection from direct sunlight. It could take direct sunlight for maybe 4 hours, but after that, it needs some type of protection. So I grow my red Pakistani mulberries with my banana plants, because banana plants, over the course of the summer, or the spring through the summer, they grow and they actually provide some shade for the red Pakistan mulberry. But it's also difficult to root cuttings, or slightly more difficult to root cuttings of Pakistani mulberries than it is other mulberries. I propagated everbearing mulberries from cuttings with ease. I propagated my lavender mulberry, what I call the lavender mulberry, by cuttings with ease. But the red Pakistan mulberry in particular, I maybe had a 20% success rate in the past propagating cuttings, and the ones that I was able to propagate that survived, I gave them to friends who planted them in their yard. And when the freeze hit of 2021, February 2021, all of those cuttings also died. Whereas the everbearing mulberries and other mulberries, you know, they bounce back with very little cold damage. So I'm going to be showing you guys lessons learned from experience, how to successfully propagate Pakistani mulberry cuttings. Stay with me. As I mentioned, my wonderful bulldog chewed off every branch that I showed you. For instance, right here, there was a branch that came out, and the bulldog chewed off the branch, which would have looked something like this. He chewed it off, and I cut the part that he chewed up so that I would have a clean cut end here, and you see it's at a 45-degree angle. You see there, it's cut at a 45-degree angle. And here, it's also cut at a 45-degree angle. And I cleaned up the chewy parts so that I can get new growth in these areas where it's pruned. For my mulberry, I do want a central leader, and probably another year I'll probably take this central branch out so that you have growth here, and it forms sort of an open canopy. But in the short term, I prune it in this way so that as new branches form, new growth forms, I'll have something to work with before just cutting it all the way back to here or something like that. Okay? So here are some of those chewed off pieces. There's one. Here's some more. I wish I would have done the video when it first happened. That way, you would be able to see how torrid was. But I believe you guys have pretty good imaginations and can guess what it looked like. Okay. So stay with me, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how to propagate these cuttings that were initially chewed off. Here's some more of them, soaking in water. They were initially chewed off. So we're gonna go ahead, using the lemons, we're gonna make lemonade. And the lemonade in this case is gonna turn into a whole bunch of new trees. Stay with me. Okay everybody, so I am back. We are about to propagate our Pakistan mulberry. First thing we did is, using some isopropyl alcohol, went on ahead and disinfected my pruning shears. Okay. And those are just Ace Hardware pruning shears, nothing special. And we're gonna go ahead and take a scion out of here. We want to be sure that we have 1, 2, 3 nodes that are going to be underground or under the dirt, and then at least 1 node above. Okay. What I'm going to do is rough this up a little bit to expose some of the cambium layer. Okay. Rough that up around that node. And as I mentioned, I have potting soil here, and the first 3 or 4 inches of that potting soil is actually a garden mix. Now I use rooting hormone. You don't have to use it if you don't want to use it. Rooting hormone is nothing special. It's just the rooting hormone that you get from your garden center, okay? Using a straw, pencil, or something roughly the diameter of your cutting. I'm gonna go ahead and make a hole, okay? Got the rooting hormone on there. I'm gonna stick it in the hole, okay? There you have it. And I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing for several more of these cuttings. 1, 2, 3. Well, that's not gonna go down far enough, so I'm gonna cut some of this extra off, which is why I have the pruning shears to go ahead and do that. Okay. I'm gonna rough it up a little bit. Clean knife. I don't mind using this knife, it's fine. Okay. We're gonna get some of that rooting hormone on it. We're gonna make our little hole. Pop it in. Okay. And we're gonna do the same until we fill this pot up. Okay. Now, do you have to rough it up? No, you don't. But since I'm doing it with the rooting. Now, I saw a video that was shot in South Korea where they took a cutting this way. I still have my 3 nodes. They're really close together, but they planted it this way. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. Now, it was not a Pakistani mulberry, it was another mulberry that's local to where they were in South Korea. But hey, why not? I'm going to go ahead and kind of excavate a little bit of a hole, sideways hole. Okay. Let me get this in there. Get those 3 nodes under the soil and have that one like that. Now what I noticed is some of these cuttings are taller. When you get your 3 nodes, it's actually taller than the pot. I'm going to save this one because it has nodes that are closer together. This one's technically taller. This one's also taller. So for some of those taller ones, we're going to try another method. Okay, I'm going to do another video on that. But what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at some of these saved cuttings to determine how I'm going to proceed. I like these cuttings because of their thickness. All of these I like because of their thickness for this particular pot. But for most of these cuttings, the 3rd node is taller than the pot. this weird looking cutting has multiple nodes that are really close together, but it's super skinny. I'm going to try this cutting in a different pot that's smaller. I'm just going to save that one for a smaller pot. So this one is a great cutting with 3 nodes on it. I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit off of the extra. Okay, so you have a fresh wound for applying the rooting hormone. I'm going to use my straw to make that hole all the way down to the bottom. And we are at least 3 nodes in. Okay. Some of this is unnecessary. So just cut that off. Here's another super skinny one. 1, 2, 3 nodes on it. I'm gonna store it up a little bit. Now, and I normally don't like them this skinny, but we're gonna see which one is what. And it has that leaf that died after my dog chewed it off. And I'm gonna go ahead, because it's so skinny, I'm actually gonna put it up against the edge of the pot. Okay. Like that. And if you hear snoring in the background, that's one of my little dogs. They snore louder than I do. This is a really good one because it's got multiple nodes. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a little bit of that extra off so we have a fresh wounded area. Okay. Knock up some of this. Okay. Okay. Get a little rooting hormone. So I gave it a little rooting hormone. Go ahead and make that hole and stick that in. So we have 7 little guys in here. Second to last step is I'm going to take this little storage bag. It's a gallon-sized storage bag. It's not a Ziploc. It's almost like a foldy sandwich baggie. Okay. Kind of gently put it over the top, get it around everything. Okay, so that we have steam. And then I'm going to tape it. Today I've got some duct tape. It doesn't have to be duct tape. Masking tape, scotch tape, any kind of tape you have that's going to hold. And I'm literally taping this bag around the edges so it's almost airtight. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a greenhouse effect inside. That's going to create a greenhouse effect. little ecosystem. Because it's like this, I just have a random little bowl that's big enough to fit. Okay? And we're going to water from the bottom. Alright? We will water from the bottom. And I'm actually going to keep this in a dark location, relatively dark location. Either in the garage, under a cabinet, somewhere that's out of view. The theory behind that is, one, the indirect light, so that you don't scorch the plant. Number two is, the theory is that the dark will allow the plant to focus its energy on making roots instead of making leaves. We'll see if that's true or not. But I think the primary thing is this bag over the top. That's going to create a little greenhouse effect. And you'll notice I didn't tape every single spot, because you do want some airflow to come in. You want some fresh air to be able to get in and out. So there's a little bit of a gap right there, and there's a little gap here. Alternatively, you could poke holes throughout this bag, but it's just easier, you know, to leave a little small air hole so the plant can breathe. Okay, we're going to set this to the side. And we're going to start with our second method. Stay with me, all right? Our next method for propagation is the solo cup method. And I'm going to give a shout out to Lead Farmer 73, among others who have used this method. He gave a shout out to someone else who taught him about it. The solo cut method works, and I've tried variations of this in the past, but this particular way that he does it, I found to be very helpful. Okay, what you do is you take a clear or translucent solo cup, okay, cut some holes for drainage. It doesn't really matter, I'm just cutting 4. Okay. You could do that with scissors too. Not to use 10 snips. But that's what I'm using. Okay. So cut little holes in it for drainage at the edges of the bottom. Okay, so you have holes in there. And what you're going to do is you're going to use 2 solo cups. One that's totally dark, so light can't get in or to disturb those roots. And then you're going to use one that's either clear, completely clear, or translucent, which I'm using translucent, meaning that you can see through it, but light doesn't go all the way through it, like 100% light, as if it was clear. This again is potting soil. Perlite for drainage. Okay. I like to use a citrus mix or an orchid mix because they tend to have more drainage in them already. Orchid, citrus, cactus mixes all are made for drainage. And as you can see, you're able to see the dirt in the cup, but light does not get into the rooting area. So if you ever want to check on it, you can just pull it up to check on your roots, and you don't have to disturb the plants. This other method right here, you're gonna have to disturb the plant. Okay? You can't see through it. So if you want to check on the roots, you'll see some little growth, you might see some leaves, you might even see some flower buds. But if you want to check on the root, you'd actually have to pull it out of the dirt. With the second method, you can check on it just by pulling up your cup. It's not going to expose the root to sunlight, it's not going to disturb the root, you're not going to tear some baby roots off. Okay, and it's good. I'm going to put a tiny bit more dirt in there. Okay, and then we're going to get to our first little cutting. And as part of this experiment, I'm going to keep some of them in just the same water that you saw earlier and see if I can get any of them to root in water. And then try to come up with a reason why that worked. Because in all honesty, I don't expect it to root in water. But we can run it as an experiment. Okay, so this is a great little one. It's the thickness that I like. You've got 3 nodes that are going to be under the dirt. Okay, just tap it off. So let's score it up a little bit. Now, when using the solo cut method, you can put one in there. I'm not. Welcome back to the Healthy Gardening Channel with Jesse. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, share with a friend. I did have a little bit of camera difficulties, but we're going to hurdle on past through that. What I wanted to show you is the 2 methods. This is what I call the peekaboo method, where you have a clear or translucent solo cup inside of a dark or opaque solo cup. No light gets through, but you can see through here. So as you're checking on the status of your roots, you can lift up and see the roots where they're not developing. And that's also why we planted each of these cuttings along the edge, because if the roots develop, you'll be able to see them quickly. With this method, they're the exact same thing, except this one, you cannot check on your roots. You'll see growth and development, but you'll actually have to pull up your cutting to see whether or not roots are there. Other than that, they share the same concept of greenhouse effect. You're going to have water that evaporates. Condensation pressure of water is going to cause evaporation. That water is going to condense on the bag. It's going to roll back down into the potting system. The plants are going to feed on it. Once leaves develop, we're going to expirate water back out through the leaves, and it's going to be a cycle. What's going to happen down below is you're going to change this water once a week. Because you do have a cycle with a nearly closed system, you could leave that water in there, but it'll turn nasty. So you want to dump the water once a week, and you're only going to have enough water to cover up the watering holes. You're not going to fill the bottom with water, just enough to cover the watering holes. You want it to dry out occasionally so that you can get air back in the system. So you have a day or 2 with no water, but you don't want it to be fully dry. So if you don't have any water in here, you better have condensation up here. You should be able to see the condensation. If you can't see condensation and it looks like it's drying out, you definitely have to have water. Okay, so it's a little bit of a trade-off. Once again, this is the Healthy Gardening Channel with Jesse. I thank you for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We're out.